Childe slash Tartaglia, one of the earlier characters released in Genshin Impact that aged like a fine wine. Going from a pretty alright character to slowly coming up to now being one of the best main DPSs in Genshin Impact and enabling some of the strongest teams and seeing an incredible Abyss win rate, while also having one of the most satisfying kits from a visual point of view and also having one of the most well-rounded ability kits in Genshin Impact. So how do you build Childe and how do you make your Childe the strongest in Genshin Impact? I will tell you that within this guide. Now, how do you build your Tartaglia? Let's go over his stat priority. The number 1 priority of stats that he needs is crit rate and crit damage. The number 2 priority is attack percent. The number 3 priority is energy recharge. And the number 4 priority is elemental mastery. And any other stat is not useful on Tartaglia. So with that in mind, let's go over his weapon. His strongest weapon is the Polar Star, which is his signature weapon, so it makes sense. And next to that, the Thundering Pulse, which is very close to the Polar Star in strength. The Thundering Pulse does amazing on Tartaglia, and due to the massive amounts of crit damage and stats that you can get. Now, Skyward Harp is also a great option on Tartaglia, as he is able to use the stats from the bow and the passive to its full degree. So it is probably your third best option after Pulse and Polar Star. And then lastly you have Aqua Simulacra, which is okay on him because the passive doesn't do a lot for Tartaglia. But the base stats are insane and you can never say no to 88% crit damage. After that, the Hunter's Path is alright on Tartaglia, because the massive crit rate is pretty good. And it is a 5-star bow, but it is pretty and then the Amos bow is just bad on Tartaglia. For the 4-star options, the Rust is probably your best choice next to the Viridescent Hunt. The Viridescent Hunt is really nice from the Battle Pass as it gives you crit, which you really need. It allows you to suck enemies on your own without needing a Nemo unit. And the Stringless is great because it buffs Tartaglia's damage by a large amount, definitely if you have a lot of reinforcements on the Rust. Another option is the Stringless. This mostly buffs your reverse vaporize damage and it's really there to make your elemental burst hit a lot harder. For your craftable options, the Hamayumi or Inazuma bow is reasonably solid, where you just pop your elemental burst at the end of your E duration and you can take benefit of the passive for your entire E duration. And for your 3-star options, even though I would not recommend this and I would definitely recommend using a crafted bow then, the Raven's bow is probably your best pick. Now let's go over artifacts. Now Tartaglia can use a lot of sets, but his best set is definitely Heart of Depths. Heart of Depths is his best set, but you can use a variety of different sets while working towards a 4-set Heart of Depths. For instance, you can use 2-piece Shimenawa, 2-piece Gladiator, and 2-piece Heart of Depths, or 4-piece Shimenawa. Any of these variations will work on Tartaglia, but the best in slot is for sure 4-piece Heart of Depths, which you could also use the new Artifact Strongbox to obtain. Now what is your stat priority? As we said in the beginning, first is crit rate, crit damage, second is attack, third is energy recharge, fourth is EM. What you want is you want a crit rate or crit damage circlet depending on your ratio, a attack percent sense, and a hydro damage goblet. Now what ratio do you want? I think for Tartaglia you usually want to follow the 1:2 crit ratio, but I would always prioritize crit rate for Tartaglia because his Riptide passive procs off a character whenever you crit them. So I would say you need at minimum 70% crit rate on Tartaglia. So only follow the 1:2 crit rate ratio if you can at least get 70% crit rate on Tartaglia. If not, just get him to 70% crit rate and get as much crit damage as your artifacts allow. And then lastly his talents. Now his talent level order is his elemental skill or E skill first, second is his elemental burst, and third is his normal attacks. Now his normal attacks do matter, because his Riptide Flash, or the water explosions that you can cause by critting enemies and proccing the mark, scales partially off of your normal attacks. So you should level your normal attacks up at least a bit. You don't need to crown your normal attacks even if you want to be a very dedicated Tartaglia main, but I would recommend at least leveling it to level 6 or 7, while leveling your E and your elemental burst to level 9. So now that you've built your Tartaglia and he is big and strong and ready to go, he needs a team full of friends to whoop ass with him. So who are we going to use? Well, I think Tartaglia's strongest team is Tartaglia International. That being Tartaglia, Xiangling, Kazuha, Bennett. You use Tartaglia together with Xiangling for this amazing Pyronado synergy, where you apply all the enemies with Hydro and Xiangling can proc Vaporizes that just deal a ridiculous amount of damage. My not that well built Xiangling can do 40k per Pyronado hit. You use the Kazuha to group up the enemies and just for his general utility and amazingness. And Bennett is the healer while also giving your team a massive attack boost. Now if you don't have Kazuha, you can play the slightly more free to play version of this team, where you use Sucrose instead of him for the same build where they are 4-piece VV to strip the enemy and just give you a lot of buffs. Another great team for Tartaglia is the new Nahida Hyper Bloom team, where you play Tartaglia, Nahida, Kazuha and Cookie Shinobu. Now there are plenty of variations of this team and you can definitely mix up the units a bit. But with this team what you do is you use Tartaglia to constantly apply the enemies with Hydro after they have been marked by Nahida. And you can spawn a absolute ton of Bloom Seeds. You proc the Hyper Bloom with Cookie Shinobu and deal a absolute ton of damage. Tartaglia is great here because you can constantly apply Hydro and you can quick swap between Tartaglia and Nahida to try and keep the enemies marked. And Tartaglia's E will never go on that long of a cooldown because you swap out of it quite fast as well. And the last team I recommend you play is the true Tartaglia main DPS team, where you play him with someone like Fischl, Beidou and Bennett. Or a variation of this where it is Tartaglia, Raiden Shogun or Tartaglia Yemiko or any off-field Electro DPS. Together with someone like Beidou for her burst, which works amazing with Tartaglia's E skill. And Bennett to just provide you with heals. Cookie Shinobu is also great here. You can use all their skills and absolutely spam Electro Charge to constantly deal massive Hydro procs and see these big Riptide explosions. There are a lot of team variations that you can play with Tartaglia. And he is a very versatile unit and can be slotted into a ton of teams. So a part of the fun of Tartaglia is seeing which are the units that you have built the best. And how can you slot them in together with Tartaglia to create an absolute insane team. But the general lineup is Tartaglia in slot 1, a off-field damage dealer in slot 2 that works really well with Hydro as a reaction, someone that can group up the enemies in slot 3 and provide some buffs, and a healer/buffer in slot 4. With that layout you can really make any team work with Tartaglia and probably clear a best 12 with it. Now that we have our teams, we have a Tartaglia build, he has a beautiful 100 to 200 crit ratio and we're ready to take on Abyss 12. How do I actually play him? Well, there are a couple of things that you can do. First of all, Tartaglia's E skill starts with a couple of rapid hits, which are very strong. And I recommend left mouse clicking 2 or 3 times and then going for a charged attack and then doing a dash to reset your combo. You can attack very fast this way and this is amazing for groups of enemies while also giving you an opportunity to rest and dodge. Another option is to constantly keep left mouse clicking to do your entire combo string in case you need to regenerate stamina, as this combo is much less damage but way less stamina intense. Now how long should you be in Tartaglia's E? Well, it is kind of team dependent, where in the Xiangling team you want to stay in your E for the duration of the Pyronado. So you want to swap out of Tartaglia when the Pyronado is done, because without the Pyronado you aren't really doing that much damage. While with the Nahida team, once you need to proc all the Bloom Seeds for the Hyper Bloom, that's when you swap out. Which is probably a lot earlier than in the Tartaglia International team where you swap out with the Xiangling Pyronade. For the general gameplay sense, you never want to be in it long enough so that the cooldown gets longer than 20 seconds. As at that point you will be spending a lot of time running around while having your E on cooldown and just waiting for Tartaglia to be ready for another round. If you are in that situation, I recommend using his charge shots, as you can actually reverse vaporize or still cast some blooms with it, and it actually does quite good damage. So let's go over an example rotation. With this rotation we start with a quick throw of the Goobas so that we can get Pyro proc and gather up all the enemies with Kazuha and then cast this Elemental Burst. We then go over to Bennett to cast his Elemental Burst and then go over to Xiangling to cast her Elemental Burst. And then finally use Tartaglia and press his Elemental skill and apply the enemies with as much Hydro as we can and constantly proc Vaporize on Xiangling's Elemental Burst to deal some consistent, really high damage attacks. Once Xiangling's Elemental Burst is done, I swap out again back to Kazuha and cast his E skill and start generating up the energy for my characters, as Xiangling maybe doesn't have a fully charged Elemental Burst again. So we do a couple of short elemental skills on Bennett, get Xiangling charged up again, and once Tartaglia is off cooldown again, we can do the rotation over and over again. And finally, when do you cast this Elemental Burst and which one do you use, the melee one or the bow one? And to be honest, both are good. The melee one does more damage while the bow one returns some energy to you and procs Riptide on the enemies. Honestly, I usually use the bow one when I apply pyro to the enemies while my E is on cooldown, and then I can use my elemental burst to do a big chunk of damage on them. Or I use my melee one whenever the enemies are currently applied with pyro and I don't want to reverse vaporize with my normal attack because I have my elemental burst, and I just hit them hard with that elemental burst. So both the elemental bursts are good, but I would recommend, if you are feeling like you are often messing up the rotation and you find Tartaglia on cooldown, you should use the elemental bow burst. But if you find you are always on time in melee mode, but you have started your elemental skill and enemies still have pyro applied to them, you could definitely hit them instantly with that elemental burst. Both versions are good, and to be honest, it doesn't matter too much which one you use, as they both have their own benefits. And now finally, Constellations. Now I am of opinion that Tartaglia is one of those rare cases where, to be honest, getting his weapon is worth more than getting his Constellations. His C1 is kind of nice. It reduces your E cooldown by 20%, but this is more a convenience constellation. If you do your rotations properly, you might find your E cooldown can still be up sometimes, but usually you can lose a charge shot or do your bow elemental burst and your E will quickly be off cooldown again and you can get going again. And then the constellation really doesn't do that much for you. And his second constellation honestly is quite terrible, just giving some more energy recharge. And his third one is nice, improving his E skills damage. But honestly, from these Tartaglia comps, Tartaglia isn't even the one doing the most damage. It's usually the character that he enables, like Xiangling, that does the most damage. So for his constellations, I recommend getting none. And if you really want to will with Tartaglia, I would get his Polar Star and then just stop there, as he's just strong enough at C0. You can go for C1 for convenience reasons, but I'd rather recommend you pull for another character. So final conclusion. I've been mating Tartaglia since the start of the game, and I think he is a very great character. I just love having him as my first DPS, because he enables so many good teams, and he, Xiangling and Kazuha and Bennett have just carried me through Abyss every single time. And I can now consistently 36 star it with this team absolutely shining. He is a absolute monster of a character, has funny lore and has the funny part where he's absolutely gone insane. And all in all is a well-rounded character, and him being a Fatui Harbinger, and maybe getting a very cool skin in the future if we get really lucky, is definitely an added on bonus. So I hope this guide helped, and if you enjoyed the guide, please like and subscribe, and I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day.